Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Today we have with us the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. John Kemp, one of my good friends.
I thought I was the number one best friend. What's this one of best friends? I don't know. You're my best friend, Cory.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks so much for having me. I can't tell you what this means, and I'm just thrilled to be here.
Yeah. So John, talk to us, just to give context to the listeners. Talk to us a little bit about, what you do for a living. I've known John for probably like 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, about 15 years, I would say. And we've done business together. Tell us a little bit about what you do, where you live. And then we'll get right into, talking about family and kids and all that.
Yeah, I was a military brat growing up. My father, career Marine, 2 Purple Hearts, fought in Korea, Vietnam. Both he and my mom buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So as a kid, we moved constantly. About every 2 years, we would be picking up, moving. And I do think that was a good basis of my life in terms of how I deal with kids, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. My mom was a nurse, and she was the head scrub nurse for Mayo Clinic for when they were developing open heart surgery. So, I've got a nice military upbringing, with the discipline and the structure, and then my mom, like I said, a very caring individual and extremely smart. Not that my dad wasn't, but she was the very intelligent one of the family. So I hope I got some of that from her. But early career was I've only had 2 companies that I've worked for. BASF, the chemical company. I started with them out of grad school in 1985. So I'm going to let the listeners do the math. I'm not going to do it for you because it just depresses me. So, and
you
then
still look like you're 35, John. So
it's amazing what plastic surgery can do these days. I'm kidding. It's all natural. But then in the current company I work for, it's a large international building corporation, CRH, and I've been there for 20 plus years and enjoyed it. I got to tell you, been in construction because construction to me has always been optimism. Why do we build things? It's because we're optimistic about the future. And so that has always been in my DNA growing up. And I think coupled with the military moves, you're forced to change. You're forced to recognize change, and you've got to keep building yourself, your career, your families. And that had a big influence on me today, in my upbringing.
That's really cool. So John, I'm curious.
Yeah.
Being raised by a career Marine,
Mm-hmm.
I know a few of you that are offspring of military Marines. They definitely had an interesting upbringing, and they learned a few things both from a discipline standpoint as well as a motivation standpoint. So can you expound a little bit on that? So what did you learn from your dad that you kept and passed on to your kids? And then what are some things that you learned from your dad that you decided to do a little bit differently? Some of those lessons learned both ways.
Yeah, Kirk, the discipline was 24/7. And my favorite story, which I did this to our kids, my father, we lived up in Illinois, and my brother, I have a younger brother, 2 years younger than myself. And he said, when we got in trouble, he said, "Now I want you boys to go out in the back 40 and pick you out a switch because you're going to get whipped." Okay. And so my brother and I walked out our back, and we had a couple acres up there at the time, and we saw a weeping willow tree. And we thought, we're going to teach the old man, the old Marine, a few tricks. So we picked out a weeping willow, right? It's wispy. It's not going to hurt us if we get hit on the butt with it. And so we picked a couple switches from the weeping willow tree. And on our way back, my father's standing at the door, grinning ear to ear. And I looked at my brother and I said, why is he smiling like this? We're going to win this. He can't hurt us with these weeping willow branches. There's no way. So we presented, in military fashion, presented the weeping willow branches, and he stripped the leaves. And if you've ever been hit with a weeping willow branch right across the bottom of your buttocks and the top of your legs, it leaves a razor welt that you never forget. Even to this day, I can still sense it. So we said, okay, we screwed up. No wonder he was smiling. So the next time we did that, we picked out a nice sturdy oak branch to take our punishment. And it was a lot less painful than the weeping willow. So that was our first lesson.
I'm surprised there was a next time.
Well, there actually wasn't, Kirk, but my mom was a disciplinarian too, being the wife of a Marine, and I tended, Cory, I know this is going to come as no surprise to you, but I tended to be a little mouthy. And so whatever my mother could grab, wooden spoon, spatula, telephone, whatever she could get, I would usually be the recipient of that. It still didn't slow me down, but I never got the weeping willow branch again. So I suppose there's some success in there. So I've done that to our kids when I taught them that story. Now, I didn't use it because I didn't raise them quite the strict corporal punishment. They got one spanking, I think, when they were younger, and that was it. So I kind of took a little different route, and my wife and I both agreed that probably wouldn't have hurt them, to have a little razor welt once in a while, but we never did that.
So, John, you and I haven't talked that much about your youth, actually, surprisingly.
There's not much to talk, Cory. I mean, it was a great childhood. I've got to tell you, there's so many stories. We're probably going to need a whole season of podcast, Cory, because there's so many stories.
Well, talk to us about something that your parents taught you that you've passed on, like whether it be some principles or the Kemps do this, or, what are some things that you feel like that you said, oh yeah, this is something good that I wanted to give to my kids?
I learned a couple things, Cory. One is obviously with the military, and Kirk, I think you alluded to this, some of the Marine kids, you are instilled a disciplinary mindset. That doesn't mean you follow it all the time. In other words, and I'm rebellious. I've always been that rebel that fought it, knowing good and well that I might end up getting some punishment, but that punishment was always a growth mechanism. And I think my dad taught me the discipline of life is the basis for growth. And I've taught, and Reese and my wife Reese, we teach the kids, you've got to have a certain amount of discipline in order to grow. Because if you think about how life is, you don't want anarchy. And you've got to have some fundamentals. Like I have to get up in the morning, I got to dress myself. That's a discipline in a different way. You don't have to have the military discipline. But I remember my father every morning, make your bed, make your bed, make your bed. And I fought that. I fought that incessantly because I'm like, I don't want to make my bed. I want to get up. I want to hit the day. And I asked him, I said, why do you make us make the bed? And here's what he said. He goes, because that is one thing in the morning, as soon as you wake up, that you can count as an accomplishment, period. That never stuck with me until later on. And our daughter now, which is another great story, she goes to the Citadel here in Charleston. And it's a military college, and the discipline is, I loved it. The commandant said, I can guarantee you one thing in 4 years at the Citadel. Your children will see the sun come up every morning they're at the Citadel. So I think that discipline is a basis for growth. And the kids, sometimes they fight it a little bit because they're exploring their freedom. And I just think if you don't have some level of discipline, and that's what we try to teach the kids, whether that's, now they're older now. I've got a son to be, Bo will be 22, Sid's 20, she'll be soon to be 21. And you can only do so much, but the discipline gives them some guardrails in life that they know, hey, here are the guardrails. Okay. Don't touch them. You can meander back and forth and explore your world, but here are the guardrails. And that's the discipline that I think everybody should have going through life. I think we'd have a better society. I don't want to get political. I just think that left or right, I think it's if we could have more human politics and interaction, but that's where the discipline really comes in my opinion. So we try to teach the kids that.
I know both of John's kids fairly well.
Yes.
Maybe Bo a little bit more than Sid, but I do know Sid, and she is an amazing young lady, and she has kind of an inner strength and an inner discipline. And I know you're super proud of both of them, but do you think what is there upbringing that you and Reese, is there something you gave to Sid to make her that way? Or do you think it's mostly just who she is, or a little bit of both?
I'm going to give Reese the credit here, Cory. I travel quite a bit, and it was great early on because before we had children, it was Reese had a career, I had a career, and I do think that Reese had to be the majority disciplinarian with Sid growing up. Where she got the military mindset, I've got a quick story. I think will probably illustrate this. Is she really wanted to go to Air Force Academy, and so we went through the prerequisite. If you get a senator to write a letter, so we went down the political road. Got to the 11th hour and we passed. I thought we had passed. She had passed all the check marks, and the senator at the 11th hour declined to write the letter. So obviously, we have to deal with disappointment in our lives, and the road's not always paved, smoothly. And it was a good lesson for her because she immediately, said, didn't have a pity party. And that's really, Cory, that's her mom. Her mom is very, she's not, when she listens to this, I got to be careful what I say so I don't get in trouble, right? I would like to say she's a little headstrong, but that's a good thing. And I think Sid got that because she said, okay, I didn't get this, but now I'm going to go for the next thing. We didn't even know she applied to the Citadel until she got accepted. But the story is that I was at a golf tournament, and the late Foster Freeze, who just recently passed away, he said, does your daughter want to go to the Air Force Academy? And I said, well, and I spent 2 hours with him. So he got to know Sid a little bit, and he picks up the phone. He's got an old clamshell flip phone. Okay. And I said, who are you calling? He goes, I'm calling the president. I just had dinner with him 2 nights ago. So I said, whoa. So now it's the moment of truth. Now I said, well, Foster, I think she has to get that and earn that on her own. And that's her mom. She got that a lot from her mom. Her mom had I would say, a challenged upbringing, and the resiliency she gets from her mom. And I think that served her well. Whether she went to Air Force Academy, West Point, or the Citadel. And that goes back to that core foundation of discipline. You got to have some level of discipline, in order to function. And she's really something. Bo is great too. Love them both. Don't have any favorites, even though everybody who knows me, right, they say, oh, you got a favorite. And I go, no, they're both great and whatnot. And I'm going to stick to that story.
So you got to finish the story.
Well, so he called, and it was Trump at the time. And so he called, Trump's on the phone, and I'm sitting right there. I'm sitting there, and I'm just like, Foster, I've only met him, right, 2 hours previous to this. And he's like, no. He said, I know you well enough now. And if your family is anything like your story, I want to make this happen for you. And I said, but it's not for me. She has to earn this on her own. So long story short, so we get a call from the State Department saying, hey, Trump had assigned this. And And I politely declined. And of course, I haven't heard from him since. So maybe I, I ticked him off. But it's, I couldn't. I don't think I would have been. She needed to do it on her own. And that's part of, Cory, I know we talk about this all the time with your kids and my kids, and, how much do you do for them? And I'll tell you the quick story of why, Kirk, one of the big reasons why I love Cory more is because we had a little issue with Bo with an international internship. This was a few years ago, 4 years ago, I think, Cory, give or take. And we had problems getting him into the UK. And again, that's a different story, but we got turned away. And it was kind of the whole US versus the UK. And he was devastated, right? He was going to go for the summer and be in London and Manchester. And I called Cory and I said, Cory, I had a problem. And he said, I didn't even get out that, hey, do you think he could work, for Big D? And I didn't even get it out of my mouth. And Cory's like, send him out here. He's got a job. No problem. Done. That's the network effect, but that's the friend. That's the human friend. And that's why Cory, I'm just so blessed to have him in my life. But that's the difference between your network. And I'd like the kids not to leverage. I want to leverage my network. Obviously I did there, but I didn't as far as the president was concerned, because I think Sid needed to get that on her own. And she loves it. Now, what's happened. Now she doesn't want anything to do with Air Force because they snubbed her. And now it's all Citadel all the time. And she loves it. So things work out for a reason and things happen for a reason. And there's a little more to the story, Kirk, but I can't get too deep because of the politics. But I think you get the gist of it.
What an amazing story. One to kind of let your kids grow. We hear this oftentimes on the podcast that you have to kind of let your kids fail to learn, right?
Yeah.
And if you're always swooping in and saving the day, then they don't really learn those lessons that make them who they end up being in the long run. And hopefully they just get better and better, right? Because they build upon who they are with the lessons that we help provide and structure for them. And, and they become amazing people. And I'm sure after her years at the Citadel that she will be an incredible officer in the military somewhere.
Yeah, we think so. She's got a lot of opportunities, but again, I think you've got to send them off into the world with some requisite confidence, because you know how it is when we were all that age. In your early 20s, I didn't know what I didn't know, and certainly they have had a lot more opportunity than I did. Kind of growing up. And really that's what you want, right? I want, my kids to do better than my wife and I. And in order to do that, I do think you've got to let them fail. You do. And this was a failure. I had leveraged a couple friendships and it didn't work out. And she learned, and I don't want the bitterness of learning. And that's the hardest part about being a dad, in my opinion, is that how do you take the bitterness out and still keep the focus in? And that is extremely difficult. And that just takes time. And you can't just do it once. You can't just have one discussion and say, oh, well, I did my job as a father. I'm good. There'd be no bitterness. We're all busy. I checked my to-do list off. I'm done. Great. Super. You can't do that. You have to revisit it. And the follow-up as a father, it has got to be consistent, because if there is no consistency in that father follow-up, as I call it, then other things start to creep in, and that's not good. That's not good, because I'm not trying to control the narrative. What I'm trying to do is support the decisions that my kids are making. It's really that's how I look at it.
Cool. John, tell us a little bit of the how on that. Like, what are some of the things that you did to maintain that father consistency? Like specific examples of things that you did as your kids were growing up.
Well, I had the company CRH has been phenomenal to allow me to have. You ready for this? This is one of my favorite things when the kids were smaller. Part of the consistency was I would take them with me on business trips. So they got to see what dad would do. So they'd come out and see Cory. They'd come out and see, other clients that are friends. And they were like, they got to see the inner workings. But you know what we did? That was a time, yes, it was kind of cool. And they got to go to the big office buildings and job sites. And it was really, they loved that. But it was more important that I had time with both kids to reinforce that's the follow-up. Is the physical presence with them. It was a business context, but you know what we did? I would make sure every week, and we usually did this on a weekend because of school and other commitments, like sports, but every weekend we'd sit at the table and we'd have a discussion. And then I would supplement that with just we called it, the business executive time, because think about it. When I was a kid, I always liked to go watch my dad on the parade grounds. And I always, when he finished his military career, then he had a second career at Sara Lee, which is probably why I'm a little heavier today because of all the pound cake, over my younger years. But, which delicious, by the way. But I do think it's important. That's the consistency, is that you've got to have a physical face-to-face meeting. And I'm going to say this, I don't know how popular or not, but no electronics, phones. Like, we used to take vacations and I would get a pillowcase and everybody would have to put all their cell phones, iPads, whatever in there, and they couldn't get them back until after vacation. So you have to be in the presence with your children. And if you're not, or if you're distracted with, business calls or something else, that takes away from them. Then I always viewed it as, I want to give them the respect that they should give me. And Cory, we do that in business every day. And I know that both of us have had discussions over the years about people who are not present. Physically, they're present, but emotionally, they're somewhere else. And that, Kirk, that is the consistency, is that emotional presence. And it pays huge dividends, right? It's not, I always believe it doesn't take a village, it takes parents. As simple as that sounds, and it could be any parents, but you've got to be present emotionally. I don't want to get too preachy on it, but it's worked for us, and every week or bi-weekly or whatever the family can do individually, and then we get together as a family and we have open debate nights, so we can debate anything and no judgment. And not, we don't attack one another. And I think that's hard. It sounds easy, but everybody has got a different viewpoint. And I think respecting those different viewpoints and not fighting back is, it's hard. It's hard.
Well, I haven't heard that before, the debate part. I like that.
Yeah, Cory, because there's so many things going on and it's open. So anything, politics, religion, life in general, dating, which I don't know if we have enough time, because that is, Cory, you said, hey, what's one of your greatest fears as a father? Dating with Sid. And she's got a boyfriend, and I don't know if I can talk about that on the podcast, but open debate. If you think about it, Cory, our industry tends to be a little Darwinian. Can I use that? And I'm a geologist, Kirk, by schooling, petroleum geologist. So how slow geologic time is, and that's kind of our industry. I mean, our industry is just glaciers move faster than our industry. And I think as debate, with everything going on in the world, and then you throw the pandemic in, and I think if you don't discuss it, especially younger people, and I've seen this a lot, not only in my own kids, but what they do is they start to internalize it. And that's not a good thing. And I've always been a huge advocate in getting it out. talking about it. But you got to have a safe space, because I think kids would feel better. I don't think nobody likes to be judged, of course, but the debate thing it's not perfect, Cory. I will tell you, there's been a few nights where I'm wanting to interject my worldly decades of life into the conversation. And you know what? But that's the beauty about the kids. I've learned more from them than they probably have from me.
I think this is an important conversation because, and something we haven't talked about before, I have seen kids, who are in their early 20s, and you can tell talking to them that an institution gave them their belief system, right?
Good point.
Whether
right.
that be spiritual, political, whatever, you can just tell this is an institutional fed belief system. Yeah. And I think one of the nice things is, even if they don't agree with you, they know where you're coming from because you've had those discussions, right? I like that. I think as my kids are really kind of getting to that age now, right? My oldest is just turning 15. It's a good time to implement what you just said and just say, guys, there's no right or wrong. This is a safe space. This is a space where we can discuss what's going on in the world and how do you see it? And what are you hearing at school versus what you're hearing at home versus what are you hearing from your friends? And let's just kind of look at the world together and come up with, and ultimately your kids are, even if they're debating you or want to be with their friends, they're going to listen. They're going to ultimately kind of, they're at least going to know how you see the world versus not ever hearing it.
And Cory, that in and of itself is, you've won 51% of the battle in terms of the development of the young people's minds, and again, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I think you believe what you believe, and, part of your upbringing influences, what's going to come out of you and what's going to stay in you. But I do think it's important that, and I know how I was at 20, and I tended to be a little more mouthy and open, but I really wanted people to, two things: hear what I had to say, as crazy as some of it was, and I wanted them to respect it. They may not have to agree with it, but I wanted them to at least respect it. And I think, giving them a safe space, with one underlying, thing, Cory, is that I always try, part of our motto and the way I have grown up, especially with leadership roles, is, leadership is an action. It's not a position. That's a family motto. We also have another family motto: don't buy meat off the side of the road. But that's more of a joke. And there's a great story, Kirk. There's a great story. We had traveling to Kiowa. You see these pickup trucks with freezers, and it said, meat and da da da. And so we it's kind of a family joke, but don't buy meat off the side of the road. That's just a standing thing.
Well.
But leadership's an action, and we always say, be a leader, not a lemming. And you think about kids, especially even younger than in their early 20s, about the especially with TikTok and Facebook and all the social media. Cory, I think you said it best. There's an institutional education, and we teach our kids to say, think for yourself, but be that leader. Don't be the follower. Plain and simple. There's enough followers in the world. And I always say, and I showed them pictures of lemmings when the one goes off the cliff and then 1,000 more follow. Don't be that. Don't be that lemming. Be the leader. And if you see something, right, that's not right, you should know right from wrong. And we taught them at an early age that. And I said, so speak up if there's something that you see. And that goes hand in hand, Cory, with the table debate, because they will present situations where you as a father or Amelia as a mom or Reese as a mom, you may never hear that unless you give them that safe space to say, hey, something happened at school and can we talk about it? Now, as a parent, right, I want to make sure nobody's hurt. At least not my kid, maybe the other kid if they got in a fight. I'm kidding. But We had a situation where Sid had some boy this is middle school, that inappropriately, touched her, and she laid him out. But she boxes, so I mean, you can imagine how tough. Cory, you know her, and so we got called in, and I just said, well, she's going to defend herself and whatnot. But we gave her that safe space, so she felt comfortable coming to us, and then we addressed it as such. But there's think about the things going on in the world, right? Between the riots and the political division and everything else. I think if you don't discuss it, and again, you're not going to solve it. That's the purpose of it, is not to solve it. It's to creatively debate. And Cory, you just said it. It's to get them to think about it in different ways. And really, if you could do that as a parent, I think you're going to win 99% of the time. And it works. At least it does for our family.
Yeah, that's cool. We've done something the last couple of years. It's kind of like a family huddle right before we go to bed. Mm-hmm. And, we have a couple of things that we do before we go to bed. We pray together, and those have been a really interesting, open conversation where it's not every night, like sometimes we're just all tired, but sometimes the kids will open up and they'll ask questions, or they'll have things that have come up, and this family huddle every night, it's a good way to end the night. And we try to do it every night with everybody that's home. And my kids are younger. My oldest is just going to drive next week. She's turning 16. So that will probably change a little bit of the dynamic of our house, where we don't have 4 kids home every night before bed. But that's been one thing that's worked for us. I think it's given them that space to ask questions. I don't know that we necessarily call it a debate. Sometimes we just default to that, right? It's arguing, but it's been a good tradition for us to have right before bed, kind of that family huddle, and then everybody gives each other a hug, goes to bed from there.
That's a great idea. Kirk, anything I think you can do, I think is just opening the dialogue channel. That will pay dividends down the road. I think the other thing that we like, or I'll say John Kemp likes the debate portion of it, is because if you think about life, I want them to be able to debate in a very logical, well thought out argument. And I failed in this coming into school. So I learned from what I wanted to become, and I didn't have in my early 20s the discipline. And I don't want the kids to go through that. And I'll give you a great example. I would always use, what little charm I had. My wife says I didn't have any, but I thought I had a little more, than the average guy. All right. And so I always let that carry me through. And you know what? That's kind of cheating, because you don't put in the requisite work. And I didn't have a good, well thought out argument until I had, until you've got to spend time with that. And I don't want the kids to go through that. I want them to be, if you're going to pick a direction, then pick a direction and go. And that's leadership. That, again, this all boils down to, and you can see, if you've got leadership and discipline at the base, I think everything else, I think you can figure it out. But if you can't critically think, then you let emotions come into this. And it was funny. Cory and I had asked. I said I was so impressed when we were up playing golf. This is years ago. You were giving suits to underprivileged kids so that they could go in for job interviews. And I thought that still sticks to me. Like, you are making a hell of a difference in terms of a gentleman. This is what a gentleman looks like. This is what a gentleman does. This is how a gentleman acts. It still sticks with me to this day. And so I was thinking, what am I going to say about what is the Gentleman Project? But you know what it is? It's confidence. It's just confidence in knowing that, I'm going to pick a direction as a leader. I've got the discipline. And being a gentleman is everything that we just talked about, doing the right thing at the right time. And it's always the little things. It's never the one big thing. I always tell my son, who probably has a little more sales bent than our daughter, but it's not the one big sale that counts, right? Because time is always the great predictor of ultimate success. So make a difference. And I'll tell you how I taught the kids, and I used to get ridiculed, but I'm a big believer. Kirk, what's the most important day in anyone's life? What would you guess?
Probably the day they get married or their kids get married.
Well, that's scary. I don't have that yet, so I can't quite give you that one.
That's from my perspective. That's the scariest day, or the greatest day too.
How about your birthday? When you were brought onto this earth? I mean, Cory just celebrated your birthday recently, and I'm a big believer in sending birthday cards or birthday wishes. And the guys in the tough construction industry were like, "That's stupid. Nobody wants that. It's stupid." And our company, right, from about the last decade, the guys that thought that, guess what they're doing? They're sending birthday cards, because it's just an acknowledgement that, hey, you were born, I don't celebrate them anymore. I have them, but I'm just past that magical mile marker where I don't want to celebrate them anymore. I'd rather celebrate other, friends' birthdays. But that's the little things. What gentlemen do is that you care about other people. Even if it's just holding a door. I'm big on old-fashioned values, huge on old-fashioned values. And, Kirk, again, without being too judgy here, but, I'll hold the door for anybody, right? Elderly, women, men. And I'll tell you a quick story about leadership. I was on and I travel, like, as I mentioned, incessantly every week. And we were on a Hertz bus in Chicago, never forget it. And the driver was phenomenal. And he was running back and forth, helping bags. And there was a guy, I'll never forget this, had a toothpick in his mouth and boots and whatever. And he was making fun of this guy's work ethic. And I was not going to let that go unnoticed. Okay. But I wasn't going to get in a fight with him. But I said, why are you picking on a guy who's making a living? And of course, I had a couple other big guys that we all didn't know each other, but we all knew it was wrong. And that's what I mean when you teach your kids, call it out when you see it. I mean, you got to be careful in these day and age, because you don't want to get shot or anything. But I think that's a safe enough method. And did I do it because I wanted to change that guy? No, he's never going to change. What I did is I wanted to make sure that great work ethic and great attitude was acknowledged, and so that individual felt valued and rewarded. That's what a leader does, and that's what a gentleman does.
So Bo was here for, a summer basically, mm-hmm. and he did a great job. But one of the things I was most impressed with Bo, and I know, he was a kid also, but
right.
In my presence at work, he was a gentleman, and we don't talk about manners that much on the podcast. Although when people hear gentlemen, they think manners, but we haven't talked about that. We've talked about pretty hardcore kind of stuff, but Bo has manners. It's a yes, sir. It's a look you in the eye. It's a firm handshake. It's open the door for ladies. It's, he brought flowers to my wife when he came over for dinner. So all the things you would prototypical hope, that mm-hmm. old fashioned value kind of stuff, Bo has it in spades, quite frankly. So maybe talk to us about, and at the time, you got to remember the listeners at the time, he was 18, I think, or maybe
he was
18, probably
18. He was 18. Yeah.
And he was mm-hmm. doing all these things. So that's not quite frankly that normal anymore, unfortunately. So where did that come from, John?
Mom and I'm a firm believer, Cory, that you give up if you're on the Hertz bus or any bus, and you have elderly folks or you have women, you get up and you give them your seat. Now I know that sounds old fashioned, but you know what? That's always in fashion. I'm sorry, that's not old fashioned. That's always in fashion because that's a respect, and gentlemen show respect, plain and simple. And we drilled that in the kids early on. And listen, they got to see some of the other stuff too. They'd hold doors, like we'd be on vacation, or you're staying at the Hilton or something, and people would walk by and wouldn't say a word, you know. And Bo especially, he's got such a great moral compass. Both of them do, but he would say, Dad, that really bothers me. And I said, well, don't let it bother you, okay? Because I said the beauty about being a gentleman, okay, it's not how other people act toward you, it's how you respond to that act. And I said, so that's the control, that's the confidence. And Cory, you're right. The firm handshake, I taught them both at an early age, because both of us, all of us in business, right? You've had the fish handshake. Oh, yeah, I can't. And then if you're going to do business with somebody, the basis of anything is trust. And I have to be able to trust you. But if I can't look you in the eye, then how am I going to do a multi-million-dollar deal with you? Or how am I even going to get through lunch with you? And Cory knows, Kirk, I really want to do this. And I think Cory is the right guy to do it. I want to write a book on just small talk for teenagers, and the manners. Here's what you do. Because as I fly around, and I've got almost 4 million miles on Delta, so I'm on a plane all the time. But I think it's really important when I go to the airport and you see everybody. Let me see. I know this isn't being videoed, but they're like this. I'm in my iPhone or I'm in my iPad, and those are. I get it. That's society, and I'm not bashing it, but I do think there's nothing that replaces the familial unit. Just having some discussion. Yeah. And 18-year-olds are not going to like having, mom and dad, unless you're the cool mom and dad. And Cory, I don't know if you want me to tell Kirk my DMX story, but that I raised my status up, my cool dad status, not the dad bod status, where you slowly sink down. But I was on a plane. I didn't know him. And back from Chicago to Atlanta, this is years and years ago, and it was DMX. But I said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm John Kemp," and he goes, "Man, you can call me Mr. X." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right. Hi, Mr. X, how you doing?" I had no idea who he was, but everybody was getting on the plane. Hey, X, hey, and so long story short, but I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. You're one of the guys from Run DMC." And he goes, "Man, that is the funniest thing I've ever heard." And it wasn't. So I'm wrong again. Anyway, we got to be, long story, we landed, and he goes, "Give me your card." And I said, "You're never going to call me." And he goes, "No, I am." So I don't know, 3-4 months later, he calls me, and we had coffee in the Starbucks in Atlanta. And of course, my kids find out, right? Because it's on social media and everything. And they're like, Dad, you know DMX? And I go, "Well, I flew with him." Oh my gosh. So I was cool dad status, but that only lasts, Kirk, that's not the foundation. That's just kind of like, that was about 6 months of cool dad, and I'm back to being old dad. No. So anyway.
Well, my kids always ask me, "Who's on the podcast this week, Dad? Who's on the podcast?" Because our guests are all cooler than Dad.
I feel your pain on that one, Kirk. I feel your pain.
Well, John, you've done a really good job of kind of beforehand answering what you think a gentleman is. Do you want to recap or add anything to the definition of a gentleman as we wrap up the podcast? What do you think a gentleman is?
Competence and confidence, and everything flows from the discipline and confidence. Because if you have confidence and you have the foundational support, anything that life throws at you, you will treat it as a gentleman. You won't be hostile and you won't be emotional, but you will treat life in a gentlemanly way. And I really believe that I think if we could do that, and you look at what's the only political thing I'll make, and it's not a right or left or red or blue argument. I think if we could all treat each other gentlemanly, I think a lot of these issues may not disappear, but we certainly would be in a better place because you're treating people with the due respect. You don't have to agree with them, and it's not about that. That's what, to me, what being a gentleman is, and everything springs from that. It's not one thing. It's having a great foundation and then giving you the confidence to go tackle whatever it is you want to tackle. Right? You want to. If you want to be a general contractor like Cory, if you want to be a building materials supplier, if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a politician, that's what being a gentleman is. It's confidence. Confidence.
John, we can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. It was fantastic. You gave us some great insight. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I love doing this, and I hope your listeners will get something out of this, because I'm just thrilled to do this. You know that. So can't wait for the next one. Hopefully I'll get invited to the next one.
Thanks, John.
We
do appreciate your time, and we appreciate your time to listen to the podcast. If you like the podcast, please share it with those that you love. Anybody that you think could benefit from something that John said today, please share it with them. You can find us on any social media platform, and we'll give you little bits of John's podcast throughout the week for you to enjoy and to share with your friends. Thanks for joining us on the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. Have a great week.